In the Lorraine mud, late in 1944, an American colonel did something every rifleman on that ridge understood instantly. He drove away. Not after the attack was over, not after his regiment had been relieved. While his own men were still pinned in the open, while German machine guns were cutting the slope into pieces, Colonel Raymond Keller climbed into his jeep, ordered the driver toward the rear, and disappeared into the gray morning. For almost an hour and a half, his radio was dead, and every man in his regiment knew it. Keller was not a new officer. That made it worse. He had been with Third Army through dust, hedgerows, bad roads, and worse orders. He had stood steady in North Africa. He had not folded in Sicily. He had held his regiment together through the long, grinding push across France. His men did not love him. Infantrymen rarely love a colonel, but they trusted him. They trusted the shape of him in a command post. They trusted his voice on the line. They trusted the fact that, when the shooting started, Keller would still be somewhere close enough to share the danger. That morning, outside a small Lorraine village called Morhange, that trust split open. The order was simple on paper. Take the ridge before the Germans could reinforce it. Push through the woods. Seize the road beyond it. Open the way for armor by nightfall. On the map, it looked like a line. On the ground, it was a trap. The Germans had dug into the reverse slope, where the pre-attack patrols had not seen them clearly. They had machine guns sighted low across the fields, mortars already registered on the draws, and artillery observers hidden among shattered farm buildings. The first wave went forward at dawn. Within 40 minutes, 2 company commanders were down. A battalion runner crawled back with blood frozen at the cuff of his sleeve. The left flank had stalled near an orchard wall. The center was flat on its stomach in beet mud. The right could not move without walking into interlocking fire. Keller's forward command post came under shelling. A round landed close enough to blow dirt through the canvas and knock a radio handset from the table. Men shouted. The map board tipped. Someone yelled that the Germans had the position ranged. Keller stepped outside. He saw stretcher men bent over low. He saw runners diving into ditches. He saw the ridge he was supposed to take, barely 400 yards ahead, and men from his own regiment pinned beneath it. Then he made his decision. He told Major Owen Voss, his executive officer, to hold the net. He said he was relocating the command post to restore control. Then he got into the jeep. At first, nobody understood what they had seen. A colonel moving his command post under fire was not unusual. A commander trying to regain communications was not cowardice. But Keller did not stop at the next fold in the ground. He did not stop at the reserve company. He did not stop where a commander could still see the fight. He went back, and the radio stayed silent. Major Voss took over with half a staff, 1 working line, and a field telephone that kept cutting out whenever shells hit the road. He patched the regiment together with runners. He canceled 1 doomed push and ordered 2 platoons to dig where they were. That saved lives. It did not save the attack. By noon, the ridge was still German. By afternoon, the report reached Patton. Patton read the first page standing up. Then he sat down and read it again. The Third Army commander had seen officers break before. He had relieved men for less. He had cursed incompetence, slapped maps, and fired commanders who hesitated too long. But this was not hesitation. This was absence. He ordered Keller brought to headquarters before dark. That evening, Keller came in wearing the same mud-stiff field jacket he had worn that morning. There was dried clay on his boots. His face looked hollow, but his posture was correct. Patton's command post was crowded with maps, telephones, cigarette smoke, and the kind of silence that begins when everyone in a room knows a man is about to lose his career. Patton did not shout first. That was what made it worse. He looked at Keller for a long moment and said, "Tell me exactly what happened." Keller answered like an officer giving a proper account. The German fire had been heavier than expected. The forward command post had become compromised. The radio net was breaking. He had believed he could command more effectively from a less exposed position. He had intended to re-establish contact as soon as possible. It was orderly. It was calm. It was even logical. If you removed one fact, his men were still under fire when he left. Patton listened without interrupting. When Keller finished, Patton asked one question. "How long were you out of communication?" Keller's jaw tightened. "Approximately 90 minutes, sir." 90 minutes? "Yes, sir." Patton leaned forward. "Your regiment was attacking a defended ridge. Your companies were pinned. Your officers were dropping. And for 90 minutes, they had no colonel." Keller opened his mouth. Patton raised one hand. "I didn't ask for your explanation again." The room went still. Patton stood up slowly and came around the desk. "I know what fear is," he said. "Do not insult the men on that ridge by pretending fear is the issue. Every private crawling through that mud was afraid. Every sergeant trying to move a squad under machine gunfire was afraid. Fear is not the crime. The crime is teaching them that when the fire gets close enough, the man who ordered them forward may not be there anymore." Keller did not move. Patton's voice dropped. "And once soldiers learn that, Colonel, you cannot order it out of them." That was the part Keller had not put in his report. Reports could record casualties. Reports could record failed objectives. Reports could record lost radios and broken lines. They could not record the moment a rifleman looked over his shoulder and realized the commander he had trusted was gone. Patton let the silence sit. Then he said, "You have two roads." Keller's eyes lifted. "You can request relief. I will grant it. You will leave this army, and no one will have to invent a polite reason. It will be finished." Patton stepped closer. "Or you can go back to that regiment and earn back what you threw away this morning." Keller swallowed once. Patton kept going. "I am not promising you they will give it back. Men under fire are not sentimental. They know what they saw. You may stand in front of them and discover that a colonel's eagles do not weigh much after all. But if there is any part of you that still belongs with them, you will not find it here." Keller asked, very quietly, "What would you do, sir?" Patton stared at him. "I would go back. Then again, I am not the man who drove away." Keller left the command post with 36 hours to decide. He did not need 36. Before midnight, Patton's aide received a message from Keller's staff. No defense, no request for reconsideration, no promise that the regiment would understand. Just one sentence: Colonel Keller was returning to command. He reached the forward area the next morning. Major Voss met him beside a collapsed stone wall that was being used as a command post. The major had been awake for nearly 2 days. His eyes were red. His hands were filthy. Nothing more. That was the first punishment. Not the anger, not the accusation, the silence. Every officer around the command post knew. The company commanders knew. The sergeants knew. By mid-morning, the riflemen knew too. In an infantry regiment, bad news travels faster than orders. Keller did not gather the men for a speech. He did not tell them he had been misunderstood. He did not say the word redemption. Men who had been left on a ridge, had no use for a colonel explaining his feelings. Instead, he called what remained of his commanders together and asked for the ridge again. Not the official map version, the real one, where the machine guns were actually firing from, which draws were covered, which hedgerows could be crossed, where the first attack had bled for no gain, which German position had fooled the reconnaissance, which squad had seen the muzzle flash no one else had seen. At first, the answers were clipped. Then they got sharper. Then they became useful. Keller wrote it down. Every bit of it by afternoon. He did something nobody expected. He went forward, not to inspect, not to pose, to listen. He moved from hole to hole through the regiment's forward line. Boots sinking into mud, shoulders hunched under a gray sky. He sat on ammunition boxes. He crouched beside shell scrapes. He listened to corporals, privates, stretcher men, and one 19-year-old bar gunner, whose hands shook so badly he had to hold his cigarette with both fists. Keller did not defend himself. That mattered. He did not say he had been trying to restore control. He did not say the fog of war had made everything unclear. He did not say men who had never commanded a regiment could not understand. He asked where the fire had come from. He asked who had been hit. He asked what they had seen that officers in the rear had missed. For 3 hours, the colonel who had vanished under fire made himself impossible to miss. A sergeant named Leo Hanratty, who had been with the regiment since the desert, watched him cross a shallow draw while German mortar fragments clipped branches overhead. Later, Hanratty said Keller looked older when he came back. Not humbled in the soft way people like to imagine. Older, as if something had finally found the place where he lived and sat down beside him. The second attack went in 5 days later. This time Keller did not command it from a safe fold in the ground. He built the plan around what the riflemen had told him. He shifted the main push away from the obvious draw. He moved the supporting guns before dawn. He held one platoon back, not as a reserve on paper, but as a knife for the machine. Gun nest that had cut the left flank open the first time, and when the lead companies moved, Keller moved with them. Not recklessly, not waving a pistol like a recruiting poster. He stayed where a regimental commander could see, decide, and be seen. That was the point. When the German gun near the orchard wall opened again, the old fear moved through the line, men dropped. The advance bent away from the fire. The same place was about to stop them for the second time. Keller went to it. He crossed 20 yards of open slope with a radio operator behind him and mud striking his coat from bullets hitting low. He reached the broken wall, took the handset, and directed mortar fire onto the gun's flank. The first rounds walked short. Keller corrected them. The second group landed behind the position. He corrected again. The third bracket hit close enough that the German gun stopped firing. The platoon he had held back moved through the gap. The ridge fell before noon. It was not clean. Nothing in Lorraine was clean. The victory did not erase the first attack, but the regiment saw something it needed to see. When the hard place came again, Keller was there, not in a speech, not in a report. There, Patton received the after-action summary that night. The ridge had been taken, the road had opened. Casualties were still serious, but lower than expected for the ground and the opposition. The regiment had attacked with better control than the first attempt. Patton read the report once. Then he put it aside. He was not a sentimental man, and he did not confuse one good day with forgiveness. But the army runs on more than fuel and ammunition. It runs on the invisible agreement between the men who give orders and the men who have to walk into those orders. Keller had broken that agreement. Now he had begun paying for it, not with an apology, with presence. Through the SAR fighting, he stayed forward enough that men could find him when the line bent. During shelling that drove staff officers into cellars, he remained where the battalion commanders could reach him. When the regiment crossed into Germany, he was not careless, but he was visible. That distinction mattered. A dead colonel helps no one. A missing colonel teaches the wrong lesson. Keller learned to live between those two facts. He never mentioned the first ridge again. Not to Voss. Not to the company commanders. Not to the men who had watched the jeep disappear. If someone expected a confession, they never got it. If someone expected an excuse, they never got that either. He answered the only way infantrymen respect. He showed up again and again and again. Years after the war, when the regiment's surviving officers were being interviewed for a unit history, Major Owen Voss was asked the question everyone had been circling. After what happened on that first morning in Lorraine, did the men ever truly trust Colonel Keller again? Voss sat with the question for a long time. Then he said, they trusted him differently. Before that day, they trusted him because he had never failed them in that way. Afterward, they trusted him because he failed, understood the cost, and came back anyway. The historian asked if that was better or worse. Voss said, it was heavier. That kind of trust has a scar in it, but a scar can be strong. Keller went home after the war and refused nearly every chance to turn his service into a story. He gave no grand interviews about leadership. He did not lecture young officers on courage. He did not write a memoir explaining the morning he left, or the morning he returned. Maybe he believed there was nothing to add. Maybe he knew the men who mattered already had his answer. At his funeral decades later, one of his old riflemen stood to speak. He was bent with age by then, leaning on a cane from a wound that had never stopped hurting in cold weather. He talked about Sicily. He talked about France. He talked about the men who never came home. Near the end, he paused. Everyone in that room who had worn the same patch knew what memory he was standing beside. He said, "Colonel Keller left us once." The church went still. The old soldier looked down at his hands. Then he spent the rest of the war making sure we never had to look for him again. That was the verdict. Not perfect, not innocent, not clean, but earned. A man can survive a failure if he refuses to let it become the last true thing people know about him. Keller left once, then he came back, and after that, he stayed.